You know, there used to be a time, not long ago, when the budget was meant to be kept under wraps and we were meant to hear on the day just what the Chancellor's thoughts were. Well, this particular mini-budget, I think, has been trailed more than ever. Almost every day for the last 7 or 8 days we've had announcements, which one always suspected were really designed to try and create a more positive scene for when the Chancellor had to publicly admit that his borrowing forecasts and his cuts programme were in more trouble than he was previously willing to admit. And that's exactly, I think, what we got with this statement today. Quite a shocking factor from the Office of Budget Responsibility, the OBR, forecasting total public sector job losses nationally will go from the anticipated 400,000 to 710,000. Now that's really, really significant nationally and particularly for Merseyside. Merseyside, not just because we're so dependent on public sector jobs, and they still make up something like 40% of the total local jobs, but because the private sector increasingly depends on public sector pump priming investment in order to deliver private contracts. So we need to see the hospitals built, we need to see the schools remodelled, we need to see the new developments in universities and in major infrastructure projects. And if there's a major cutback in public sector spending, then those things are less likely rather than more likely to happen in a sensible time frame. So we're going to have to watch that one very carefully. There's also, because we do have so many public sector jobs in Liverpool, the impact of this on consumer confidence and on consumer demand could be quite severe, and that will have ramifications for our retailers and for our service companies. Much of what else he said was trailed. Credit easing programme to underwrite up to £40 million in low interest loans to small and medium-sized firms. Well, we're already living through a period of extraordinarily low interest rates. The problem isn't, and although there are issues, especially amongst SMEs, in gaining access to finance, and it's good to have a helping hand in that regard. It doesn't really constitute a stimulation of demand, does it? So it's going to be interesting to see just what difference that makes. I'm sure we have to welcome it. It's good that there's another nudge in the direction of the banks to be more conciliatory with their loans policies and with their loan charges. But whether it really constitutes a stimulus to demand, we'll have to wait and see. The Regional Growth Regeneration Fund, an extra £1 billion. Well, again, that's welcome. But Liverpool has put major bids in round 1 and round 2 of RGF Mark 1, as it were. We still haven't seen a serious distribution of any of those funds. Lots of projects given the green light, lots of boxes ticked, but candidly we haven't really seen any of the money released yet. So it's not just about announcing that the money's available, it is actually making it available and ensuring that it's spent. So we'll be watching that one, particularly from the local enterprise partnerships perspective in Liverpool. But great to have the additional money to bid for, and we'll be working with local SMEs and local larger companies to try and ensure that once again we get at least our fair share. What is genuinely welcome with no qualification is the extra money for science and for a support package for energy intensive firms. Some £250 million additionally available for energy intensive firms, and another £500 million for science development. Incredibly important. We've seen the UK lose too much of its traditional lead in science and science teaching and the like. So hopefully this £500 million, once it's made available, will be a terrific boost in that direction. From an SME perspective, of course, it'll be terrific to see the extension of business rate holiday relief to 2013. Very, very welcome. And although he doesn't go into any detail, there's talk of new time limits for planning applications. That means presumably shorter rather than longer. The government's been almost obsessed with the importance of reforming the planning system, and in particular making major infrastructure projects happen quicker by short-circuiting the planning process. Again, the proof will be in the eating there. We'll just have to see how that works its way through the system, because quite often the localism angle in that ends up deterring investment rather than encouraging it. And of course there's the announcement of £1 billion so-called youth contract, which Nick Clegg had already made a few days ago, which is meant to subsidise work placement short term up to 6 months for up to 410,000 young people. If you take that on top of the increase in the apprenticeship programme that was announced and other initiatives meant to get graduates into work and those sorts of things, then it's extremely welcome. But again, it's all tinkering with the supply side. In Liverpool, the Chamber of Commerce is one of the biggest private sector providers of apprenticeships. We've got no shortage of bright young kids and younger people who are looking to make their way in industry. What we are increasingly finding is that companies haven't got the confidence to take them on and to commit to training them over the longer term. So that's about the demand side of our economy. That's about persuading people that the economy has a future, has a short and medium term future of which they'd like to be a part. There was a passing reference and a rather teasing reference to the Atlantic Gateway, which is the scheme from Peel Holdings to try and drive a great development corridor all the way from the estuary in the Mersey and the Irish Sea right the way down the Ship Canal into the Salford Docklands area. Incredibly exciting. I think it represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for this area where you have a single private sector owner of such a huge swathe of critically important land. I think it needs to get all the backing it can from government, and it was good to see that there was a positive reference to that, although of course fairly light on any kind of detail. And talking about infrastructure, and again this was very widely trained, another £5 billion of public sector investment in new infrastructure projects, which will unlock a further £30 million, it is hoped, £30 billion it is hoped, from the pension sector and other institutional private sector investors. I think that ought to be quite well received by the investors, because it's not as if there's a great kind of smorgasbord of good investments out there ready to take advantage of. So there's no reason why we shouldn't think seriously as pension fund managers and the like, no reason why we shouldn't think seriously about investment long term in infrastructure, which might give you a lower return but a guaranteed return over a longer period of time. So I'm hopeful that will make some difference. But he can't escape the fact that so much of what's happening in the economy is beyond his control. No Chancellor will ever admit that. No Chancellor will ever want to publicly say that he can't guarantee the avoidance of another recession, for example. But the truth is, so much is out of his control, particularly with what's happening in the Eurozone and what's happening in the rest of Europe, and indeed in the rest of the world. The implications for oil prices and commodity prices of the so-called Arab Spring, the implications for the whole of the not just the Western world, but the whole of the world economy, of the continuing debacle in the American Congress and Senate over the need to bring spending under control in that economy. So much that no local Chancellor can hope to manage. He has had to concede that growth forecast will drop from 1.7% for 2011 to a new depressing level of 0.9%, and then even less for 2012, where we had been anticipating last year 2.5% growth in 2012. It's now down to 0.7%. Difficult times. It's difficult for me to understand how the Chancellor can concede that we're not going to hit the growth targets, concede that the growth targets are down really quite radically on what he'd originally suggested. And given the broader macroeconomic context, it's difficult to understand how we can say with any great confidence that we're going to avoid a second recession, a double dip recession. I hope he's right. I'm sure he knows an awful lot more than I do, and I hope he's able to deliver on it. And finally, I guess there was the interesting stuff was the idea of taking on the public sector unions by effectively tackling national wage bargaining deals, by regionalising public sector pay deals and putting a 1% overall cap on public sector pay. Whether it's politic to announce something like that on the eve of a national strike in the public services will remain to be seen. We all understand that the public sector, especially the pensions issue, needs to be gotten a grip of. We do understand that the Chancellor needs to show strength and leadership in this, but occasionally I think there might be a case for rather more jaw and less war. And a couple of nice snippets. 3% fuel duty plan for next year scrapped, common sense, and rail fares pegged at 6.2%. rather than 8.2%, which was planned in the last budget. But it all still amounts, even with these cuts and even with these savings, it still amounts to an extra £100 billion in government borrowing for the life of the Parliament. And how that's going to help is difficult to anticipate.